Hi, I'm Becky Drozdz. Thank you for tuning into the Guerrilla HR Podcast. In Diversity.com's 2025 Workplace Discrimination Report, 86% of professionals said they feel that they belong at work, but only 76% said they feel safe speaking up when something feels off. If employees don't feel that they can speak up, there will be some signs like turnover and lack of engagement. My guest today is Ivonne. Ivonne is an expert in organizational change, corporate culture, and communications. She founded EmpowerUp Consulting in 2024 after decades spent leading communications, employee experience and diversity, equity, and inclusion for multiple world-renowned brands. Hi, Ivonne. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to dive in right with the heavy question. So diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, belonging, this has all been lumped into this category that has gotten a bad rap. Why is there so much hate against DEI?
I think a lot of the hate against DEI is honestly because it's misunderstood. When you ask people to define DEI, even people who are tasked with doing the work of eliminating it, they often don't even know what the definition is. But when you break it down, when you think about diversity is just appreciating all of the differences in a collective team or organization. Inclusion is just making sure everybody's voices are heard. Equity is all about giving people a fair shake. The concepts themselves are really hard to dispute. But it has become politicized to the point where DEI is almost like a bad word now, right? But again, I think that it's just really, really misunderstood. But this is a moment also for DEI practitioners to think about what are the things that we've been doing well or not doing well that have led to some of this backlash or the perception of negativity of DEI, and what can we do differently going forward and still get to the same goals that we want to achieve.
Yeah, it's thinking of it from that aspect of it being politicized and the whole idea of being woke. I want to ask people, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be woke, and why do you think that that's something bad?
Hey, you could call me woke all day. I don't see it as anything derogatory, but I think that when people say it to you in a derogatory way, it's this intention that you've kind of overcompensated on political correctness, right? People criticize the use of all the acronyms and really to me, all of that language, again, is just about being more inclusive and recognizing people who aren't in the mainstream, but it doesn't mean that they're not part of our diverse ecosystem, right? Or like a rainbow or melting pot, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So to me, the wokeness is really just awareness of inequality in our society and using language that is more inclusive for everyone who makes up our society. So you can call me woke all day and I'll wear it with a badge of honor.
Same. I'm right there with you. Standing right there with you for sure. Yeah, I think language is really important. And I think we have so many words that they have a meaning, they have a definition, obviously, and people take them to mean something different, or they they create a whole new meaning for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because they've come up with their own idea of what it means.
Yes. Which is why I think we need to be talking about it, because we need to be using some common language to say these are concepts and this is how it's actually playing out in our society.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So what are we missing when it comes to inclusion, particularly in our workplaces?
Yeah. So I think when we talk about DEI and inclusion, we think a lot about the aspects of our identity that can be a little controversial to talk about now. It's things like race and age and sexual orientation. And those all are a part of who we are inherently. That's what I call like our core layer of identity. It kind of determines how you walk through the world and how the world sees you, right? And then there's this second layer of identity that I say is like by choice or by chance. These are things like where you live or where you grew up or where you were born, whether or not you're married, if you have kids. All of those things, again, kind of really determine how I see the world and how I walk through the world as a parent or as someone who's married or not married, because we all experience life differently based on those choices or circumstances in our lives. And there's this third layer of our identity that I say only happens in the context of work. Like you walk in the door and you get this extra layer of identity that doesn't happen outside of the workplace. It doesn't matter outside of the workplace. And that is determined by things like where you work, what your job title is, whether or not you lead a team. If you're on the front lines working in a facility or you're working in a corporate office, all of those things comprise what I call your workplace identity. And those things really determine how you experience work. They determine how much access you have to opportunity, how much access you have to promotions, how much access you have to information, how connected you feel to the purpose of the company or to other people within it. So I think the layer that we're missing when we talk about DEI and inclusion is how do we think about identity differently in the context of the workplace? And who are those folks inside of our organization that we are not including based on their workplace identity? You know, common example, if you work in a corporate office, maybe your field team isn't included in town hall meetings, right? It's an information gap that only exists because we've decided that the corporate team should have access to different information than they should. In some cases that may be valid, but in a lot of cases it's not. You know, so when we think about inclusion, we can even think that basic, like what information do these people have that these people don't? How do we include them in it? How do we include more people in making decisions? Things like that. So I think when we can reframe it that way, in a way that becomes structural and organizational rather than personal, that's the gateway to still achieving our DEI goals in a way that makes sense for your organization, and that, again, is a little more pragmatic versus political.
Yeah, I think the key word that I heard is access. There's certainly no shortage of talent anywhere and at any level, but I do think the barrier is the access. And particularly when you're thinking about information sharing, just like the idea of the town hall and who's there, if somebody's offsite or their field versus, you know, in-house. And I think that makes such a huge difference. And that is where a lot of people get left out.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a concept I call the ghost gaps, and these are the invisible divides that exist in every organization. And the ghost gaps kind of determine how connected you feel to the organization and how much access you have. So you have a power gap, who gets to be in the room and make decisions. The information gap, who gets to be in the know or not in the know. An investment gap, who in your organization gets invested in and doesn't. You know, a lot of times investment in an organization is concentrated in the higher parts of the organization, those who least need the investment, right? And then there are things like a purpose gap, like how connected do you feel? So those ghost gaps, they infiltrate every organization at every level. And the wider they get, the more disconnected you feel, the less access and connection you have. And so you have kind of this vicious circle where you're investing in the people who already feel connected and have access. And oftentimes then it becomes that your front lines of your organization kind of get ignored or even treated as expendable. That's a huge mistake for organizations because there's a lot of evidence that shows when you invest in those folks who are often the least informed and connected, you actually get leaders who are more loyal in the long term and become better managers. And a lot of organizations just aren't doing that work anymore. But, you know, that's what I'm trying to help people identify, like put a name to something that's kind of invisible that is haunting every workplace right now, because when we can see it, when we can start to identify those gaps, we can start to think about, like, how do we navigate it or how do we fix it in our organization?
I like your language for that, the ghost gaps, the things that are creating those divides, but that we don't necessarily see them. It's hard to identify. Since they are hard to identify, what are some of the signs that you do have a problem and that you do have some of these ghost gaps?
Yeah. So at the organizational level, you can start to ask yourself things like, who's in the know and who's in the dark, right? Who has access to an intranet or who doesn't? You know, you can get down to like some real tactical things. You know, if people work in a manufacturing facility, what information are they able to get or not? Because they don't sit in front of a computer all day, right? Yes. So information asymmetry becomes very clear once you start to really look at it. When you think about power gaps, who gets to be in the room making decisions and who doesn't? How can we get more people to be involved in those decisions? We know that everybody can't be in the room all the time. We need a huge room, and that doesn't make any sense. But you can start to ask those questions about, like, are there ways for more people to be involved in decision making? You know, again, at the organizational level, thinking about where you're investing in time, resources into skill building and leadership development. You know, Again, are you only sending the people who are at the top of your organization to annual conferences for learning and development, or are you investing into programs for your frontline leaders? So those are the questions you could start to ask at the organizational level. But there are some things that you can do at the individual level too to think about what gaps you are experiencing in the workplace. What rooms am I in or not in? How can I pay it forward to others who don't get to be in the room? How can I share information more widely? So you can start to be introspective too, like how am I not getting involved in ways that I could get involved? Maybe I could join an employee resource group and get myself more visibility versus sitting back and complaining that I don't have any visibility. So I really urge both at the organizational level and at the individual level to have agency over the system that is created within the organization.
Yeah, the first piece that you said there really resonates with me, particularly in the context of just availability of information in that manufacturing environment.
Yeah.
And so I worked for an organization, this is years ago, but anytime we were doing, an open enrollment or we were doing some sort of training, an ethics training or a refresher on something, safety training, a lot of times we would have we have these web-based tools. Well, our employees are not sitting in front of computers. And then it would be like, well, we would like paper to do some of these enrollments. And so you'd get pushed back at a corporate level that, well, we're not going to have paper for this. Like, we don't even have a kiosk. Like, we're going to have to set something up that we don't have. And so, I can really see how that lack of information, and then it makes it harder for people to do the things that we're asking them to do. So it's, how can we expect to have completion or timely enrollments when we're not even giving the resources to do that?
Right. Or how can we expect people to even feel connected to the strategy of the organization when we're not really communicating it to them? And there are so many ways to reach people. I think we bias toward technology, right? But when I worked in manufacturing for a long time too, like we would do print materials, we would send things to people's homes so that their spouses would see it too, especially with benefits enrollment. Yeah. So, there's like really no excuse anymore for leaving people in the dark when it comes to the information that they need. But there also is some personal accountability. If I'm the person who works in the facility and I'm getting things mailed to my home, I should probably read it and then not complain about I didn't know something when it was sent to my home. So there's like multiple layers of responsibility there.
Sure. One of the things you also said there too is just, in thinking about how people are interacting and if some of that maybe is in person. So not even just we're doing it from a technology standpoint and we're relying too heavily on that. So we're looking at print, but to the relationship piece of things. And I think particularly with some of these gaps, if people feel like they can't bring their whole identity to work or they have this third identity of who they are as an employee, then when it comes to communication, things are really getting lost because people aren't showing up in an authentic way.
Yeah. I mean, I think I could go on about authenticity at work because I think it's a bit of a myth or a misnomer, this idea that you can just bring your whole self to work. I don't think any of us really feel safe doing that completely. So it's like, what parts of yourself are you willing to authentically bring into the workplace where you still can feel safe doing that? And that part of that, again, is personal. Part of that is organizational. But I think you're right, though, that there is just this importance of human connection that we often forget, particularly when there is a physical distance. It's like physical distance creates emotional distance. We all have proximity bias. We're all going to be biased to the people who are around us. And then the people who we don't see as often, we're just not thinking of them as often. And so we see that kind of exacerbated in environments like manufacturing and retail, where that information asymmetry just gets worse and worse over time. So you have to be very intentional about forming that human connection and doing things in person when you can. Like, why not? I think people are mostly back in the office these days, so there's no reason to not be having that human connection.
As we're talking, this is like at a very superficial level, but it's popping into my head, so I'm going to share it. So I'm cold, so of course I have my sweater on, but I have several tattoos. I have several tattoos, and I worked for an organization for several years, and our CEO, he was in the process of retiring. It was like during COVID, like kind of early COVID. So it was like, are we in the office? Are we out of the office? So I was in the office one day and I had like a short sleeve shirt on, and again, I had worked there for years, and the CEO sees me in the hallway and he sees this tattoo and he comes over and he's like, is this real? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, have you always had this? And it's like, why, yes, I have. I just have always made sure it's covered.
Yeah.
But because this is a day where like we're not client facing, there's nobody
Yeah.
here, and I didn't expect to see you. You know?
But
like
did
so
he
many
care that you
people.
had a tattoo? Did he care that you had a tattoo?
I think that if he knew I had it, yes, I
Yeah.
would have been treated differently.
Interesting. Okay. Because I think
Yeah.
a lot of times, like we assume that we will be judged on something, and that's not always a fair assumption. I worked in, like I said, in manufacturing for a long time, and I'd wanted to color my hair purple. And I was like, I had been there for a few years. I knew I was in good standing. I was a valuable employee. I was pretty confident in my standing. And so I was like, I'm just going to do it. And I did like really dark purple. And I was like, look, nobody even said a word. Nobody noticed. And I was like, it was just all in my head that somehow they were going to treat me differently or something, So I think we can push that sometimes and push what our notions are of what's professional or not professional in the workplace, because more people than you realize probably have tattoos on their arms.
Well,
too,
and
right?
now it's like part of what I love, and like having my own business. But it's like, okay, I'm not. There's nothing I'm trying to hide here. Like it's,
Exactly.
I like this decoration. It's funny you said the hair, because when I was in manufacturing, same thing. I had always wanted to do some pink, and I did some pink, and it was like a great time and place. Not treated differently or viewed any differently.
Yeah.
But it was such a contrast then to this other organization where like the tattoos were. I don't know that I would have had some of that same access if you knew they were there.
Well, though, sometimes this makes me think of a story too. When I was working at a manufacturing company, we had somebody who worked in the manufacturing facility, frontline in a steel mill, and they were going through a gender transition. And we wanted to support this person, but also help educate the people that they worked with around how best to support that person. And I was very fearful around how this would go. And we brought in like a professor of gender from a local university to talk to all the employees who worked around this person in different departments, to talk about what it means to be transgender, what it means to go through gender transition. And afterward, and this is mostly men, mostly men in a steel manufacturing facility, mostly white men. And after this session that we hosted for them, many of them came to me afterward and said, thank you for bringing this person in and for educating us, because this is just stuff we've never even been taught or thought about. And they had never been around a person who was transgender. And so I went into it like, I was more closed-minded, that they knew of. You're right, that they knew of. And I was thinking I had made assumptions about these men that they would not be open-minded to accepting their fellow coworker, and that really wasn't the case at all. So that goes both ways sometimes.
Yeah. That's a good reminder for sure.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. So one of the things that I often think about when having these kinds of conversations and thinking about that is the whole concept of privilege.
Yes.
And so I feel like there are a lot of people that I don't know, they want to deny privilege exists, or like I think that's it, like privilege deniers. Like,
yes.
How do you help educate and maybe get past some of that?
Yeah, it's always people get so defensive when you talk about privilege, because people, to your point, they don't want to admit that they have any level of privilege. And privilege, I think we have now come to associate privilege as a racial, with a racial association, white privilege. But really, privilege can exist in a lot of different realms, right? In a lot of different ways. Like, I'm more privileged than somebody who lives in an apartment because I own my home. There are so many ways that privilege shows up. So I think when you explain privilege in a way that has nothing to do with race, people start to understand it a little bit easier. Even if your parents are still married and you are a grown adult, that is a position of privilege, because a lot of people didn't grow up with having married parents. It's a different dynamic in your household. You may not have had to travel back and forth between homes. You haven't had to live through a divorce. So there are all these things that happen in people's lives that put them in a position of privilege or not of privilege. And so privilege to me is really just about understanding that you don't have barriers in certain ways that other people do. And again, when you explain it outside of racial terms, that's to me when people start to understand it better. And once they connect those dots, then the racial privilege becomes very evident and easy to understand.
Yeah, I think you're right. I hadn't really thought about that most people are probably focusing just on race when it really is something bigger. I've had conversations with some people, and I live in South Carolina, so I'm in the South. And so, I get I'll hear people like, oh, I'm so blessed I have this beautiful home, or I'm so blessed that even though gas is expensive, at least I have a car. And I'm like, that's privilege.
That's
like
privilege.
Whatever
Absolutely.
you're saying, like you're blessed with, like that is privilege. Like,
even people now, we're in this highly politicized environment, but when people tell me that they don't do politics or they don't watch the news or they don't pay attention to politics, that is privilege. Because that means that you are not being affected by the things that are happening, So even that, it's like people don't recognize that even the simple things that your ability, you're blessed to be able to avoid certain things. That's because you're in a position of privilege.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. I think when I hear some of those things, though, I get mad. I'm mad about it.
I know it's hard to not be mad at everybody right now.
Yeah. I'm like, how could you not see these things? Like, think about somebody else. And of course, I say that being a middle-aged white woman, where privilege and so many different boxes that you can check. But it's I think it's so important to use that then for recognizing where we have systemic issues and working to make genuine change. So I think there's so much that's performative, and whether that's as an individual or whether it's an organization that is, paying lip service to DEI, are they really doing anything about it?
Right. I think the backlash of DEI and the pullback of DEI shows us that a lot of companies were doing it for very performative reasons. They were doing it because it looked good for them, not because it was the right thing to do. And then what we're seeing today is companies who are sticking with it, who have decided it's the right thing for our business, it's the right thing for our people. And so we're going to stand on this. And so it's been really disappointing over the past year, to be honest, to see all of the pullback, because it was taking the mask off around which organizations really meant it and which ones didn't.
Yeah. And that's so hard too, thinking about one of the things that I will often talk to people about is, if you feel like you don't have a voice, I'm always telling everybody, call your senators and congressmen, I'm all over that. But I think part of it too is and how you use your dollars and where you spend money. And so I think in seeing these organizations and figuring that out, it's where you choose to spend your dollars. But I think that then ties back to that privilege space of, well, can I afford to go somewhere else where now I have to pay for shipping, or if I'm going to order something, or can I drive further to a different store versus the one that's right down the block for me? And so it's all super interconnected.
No, for all the reasons you just listed, Costco is my favorite place to shop. I've been a member for a long time. Yep. My husband's been a member for a long time. He probably would have said we should get married there if they had that option. But so we're big Costco fans, and to see that they've really leaned into DEI and stood firm, and they don't do a lot of advertising about it, right? They're not performative about it. You just see it when you walk into their stores by the assortment of the products that they offer, the assortment of people who are working at the cash register, and the assortment of people who are shopping in their stores. You can tell that they very much value diversity, and they're not just about the lip service, they're actually living it. I have a brother-in-law
living wage, is a $20 an hour. That's huge.
Yeah, I have a brother-in-law who's neurodiverse, and he works at Costco, and he has been there for years and loves it. And they also do a lot of the things that to battle the ghost gaps that I was talking about. Their CEO started as a forklift driver, so they actively invest, not just in living wage pay, but actively investing in their employees, because you see them moving up, moving around. And so they are really demonstrating what it is to live the values that they say they stand for. So, but to your point about privilege, it's a privilege to be able to be a Costco member and to be able to shop in bulk. I have to pay for an annual membership. If I'm, I can go in and I can buy a 24 roll of toilet paper pack. If I didn't have the means, I would be shopping for a 4-pack of toilet paper instead and paying more per roll, So it's then you have to understand that yes, you can use your dollars to kind of show your values, but you are also in a position of privilege when you're doing that.
Yeah, it's so funny. Not funny, but with Costco. So we just recently got a Costco where I live. And so
Yay.
there was all of this discussion and talking amongst the county, and people were talking about bike racks outside of Costco. And people
Yeah.
are like, who's riding a bike to Costco? And why did it? And I was like, hello, $1.50 hot dog. Like,
Yeah.
yes, people
Yeah.
are riding a bike to Costco, and maybe
Yeah.
they're not buying like 30 rolls of toilet paper,
Right.
but there's something there for them. Like,
Yeah. Or they're
you know,
getting their prescriptions there, or
yes,
they're,
yes.
going to the eye doctor, or they work there, and
Yes.
that's how
Yeah.
they get to work. Yeah.
Yeah,
All kinds
but
of
just
things.
all the different comments that are like, "Oh, can we just step back for a second and think about
Yeah.
this?"
Yeah. A lot of things would be resolved if we just stepped back for a second and
Yeah.
thought about it.
Okay, so how can we encourage people and organizations to do that very thing? To just say like, "Hold up, let's come to the table and let's talk about these things."
Yeah. It's hard because some organizations are just going to be naturally more willing to have some of these hard conversations than others are. A lot of this work requires some deep introspection, not just about people, but about your culture, about your organizational values, what's important to you and what's not. So to me, those conversations have to start at the top, really thinking about what is it that's important to us and what do we stand for. Because your culture is just going to be an extension of that. And so once you have some good leaders in place, you can start to have some of those tough conversations around, where are these gaps in our organization that we can start to think about. How do we make a workplace where more people can thrive? That's basically the bottom line. How do we create a workplace where more people can thrive, where everyone can thrive, whether they're on the front lines working in a store or in their corporate office as a VP? What are the things that we are doing to ensure that everybody can thrive, that there's a fair playing field, that we are investing in everybody, and that people just feel like this is a place that they want to be? So, it's tough work to be that introspective, but it also can be very rewarding, not just on a personal level, but on a performance level if an organization can do it. Yeah.
I think that's great advice. How can we make sure that everybody can thrive? Because certainly if everybody can thrive and feels more engaged, then as an organization, they're going to be more successful as well.
Exactly. That's right. I mean, disengagement last year alone cost like $9 trillion to the global economy. So, it's important for people to be engaged. And I think disengagement right now is at its highest level it's been in over a decade. And, in this employer's economy, it's kind of easier for companies to just not necessarily care about those things, but you can still get greater performance from your employees if you care about engagement.
Well, and I think as things change, which at some point they will, it's also a situation of like, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube. So the way that you show up now, people are going to know that and you're not going to be able to backtrack on it. So I think people are seeing that and they're knowing it. And when things shift,
That's right. And people
people
can have a really long memory. I mean, look at what's happening with Target, their pullback from DEI felt like a betrayal for so many, including myself. I worked at Target. That's where I spent 5 years at Target Corporate. That's where I started my career. I was doing DEI before we were even calling it DEI. So when they pulled back from it, even if their programming is still more advanced than other companies, the pullback people will not forget or forgive. The boycott lives on.
Yeah. It's like, I know people that don't want to go there because they've said like, oh, well, they carried, a line of swimsuits designed for transgender individuals. Yet now to the flip side of that, it's like, well, you've rolled back and now you're not supporting. So now what have you done? Like now nobody wants to go there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Ivonne, thank you so much for spending some time chatting with me. Great conversation, and I appreciate your tips and advice to organizations, and hopefully we can get some engaged people and have successful organizations. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, and I'd love to come back anytime, and your listeners and viewers can reach out to me. I'm at yvonneforno.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we are at the end, and it is time for, oh my God, Becky, look at that comment. So there is a person, their name is Jenny Clark, that I follow on Instagram. And Jenny was talking about corporate diversity initiatives and how many of them actually came about as performative responses. So kind of like what we talked about in our episode today. Basically, Jenny was saying that employers and organizations responded to legal and social pressures so that in order to be compliant, they were doing these things. And Jenny called it compliance theater. So many of the comments called out these orgs that were engaged in compliance theater and have since abandoned DEI, kind of like we talked about in our episode today. So I keep seeing this idea of performative DEI and performative activism, which of course is making it look like you're doing something, but really you're just making yourself look good and you're not doing anything to affect actual change. So I am asking all of you who are watching or listening to use your genuine commitment and your energy to be authentic in your actions and to do what you can to help create some true social justice. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
That's it for this episode of the Guerrilla HR Podcast. We hope you found some unconventional wisdom and actionable advice to help you in your own HR journey. Remember, we're all working together to build better workplaces. Want to join in the conversation? Send us your questions, stories, and maybe even your own guerrilla tactics to podcast@guerrilla-hr.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with your network. Until next time.